our virtual participants and also our participants here in Istanbul. We're going to formally start this session. This session is a virtual session sponsored by the Jobs Knowledge Platform. The title of the session is Public-Private Partnerships for Improving Employment Opportunities for Youth in the Middle East. The session moderator, who is going to introduce the speakers, is Mr. David Robalino. He's a lead economist and also the head of the labor team at the World Bank. And without further ado, let me pass the word to David. And just for the audience here in Istanbul, at the end of this session, we are going to have time for questions. If you want to ask a question in English, you can come here to the podium and ask a question to the speakers. If you want to ask a question in Arabic, please approach Rania, and she will come here and ask the question for you. Without further ado, David, let me pass you the word. Please, I want to thank the speakers, which David will introduce. Thank you very much for being there, and thanks for the JKP and for the team in Istanbul for making this possible.
Thank you very much, Diego. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm connecting from Washington, D.C. It's a very cold day here. We're even going to have snow, it seems. Hopefully the weather is better over there in Istanbul. I'm going to introduce the panelists shortly, but let me start by setting up the context for this session on public and private partnerships to improve labor market opportunities for youth. You know that youth are having a difficult time finding jobs worldwide, but the problems are more challenging in certain countries and in certain regions, including the Middle East and the North Africa region. And it's not only that unemployment rates for youth are high, 3 times higher than for adults in the case of the Middle East and North Africa region. This is only the tip of the iceberg. A very important problem is that many youth are not even looking for jobs. They are inactive and they are not studying either. They are idle. 30% of youth in the Middle East and North Africa region are in this situation. If you add the 12% who are unemployed, we're talking about 40%, 42% of youth who basically are not in a productive job. And then if you look at those who are working, you see that 50% of them are self-employed or in unpaid family businesses. They are not even receiving an income. Those who are receiving a wage, a salary, 50% of those who are working are the majority in the informal sector. They don't have access to the social security. Why do we see this problem? Part of the issue is education. If you look at the numbers, you see that 60% of youth in the Middle East and North Africa region who are already in the labor market looking for jobs don't have secondary education. They haven't finished high school. Only 5% have a diploma for a university. And even among those who went to university, around 40% are in jobs that do not use the skills they acquire. They are basically working on things that didn't need the diplomas they acquired in university. And at the same time, if you ask employers, they will tell you that one of the reasons they are not able to fill vacancies, entry-level vacancies, that they don't find young people with the right skills. So in this session, we want to talk about some of the solutions to this problem, how the government and the private sector can collaborate to address this problem. There are certain things that need to be done in all cases. All countries, for all workers, not only for youth, need to be able to create political and social stability. They need to get the right business regulations in place. They need to have an independent judiciary system. They need to be able to invest in infrastructure and in human capital, but all these policies are going to take time to produce an effect. So the question is, what can we do now? What can we do now, particularly for youth who have more difficulties than adults to find a job simply because they don't have experience looking for jobs? They are less likely to have access to capital. They have shorter or smaller social networks. And some of these interventions, you have been discussing them already during this conference, are active labor market programs ranging from public works, wage subsidies, training programs for youth, programs to try to connect youth to jobs, intermediation programs. Most of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa region have these programs, as you all know, but they're not working well. There are many reasons for this, in part the lack of resources, but a fundamental reason is that the people working in these programs, managing these programs, civil servants in most of the cases, simply do not have the incentives. They do not have the incentives to address the needs of youth or employers. And the question today is, what can we do? What can governments with the private sector do to make these programs work better? So let me introduce our panelists. I think that most of them are connected now. And I'm going to start with Branka Minic. Branka, maybe you can raise your hand. She's the Senior Director for Global Corporate and Government Affairs at the ManpowerGroup. There she focuses on emerging markets in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe. Branka is also a member of the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Youth Unemployment, and her expertise is basically in developing private-public partnerships and workforce development. Thank you very much, Branka, for joining us, being here with us. Then let me move to Dr. Mona Mourshed. Mona, welcome. Mona is the director with McKinsey & Company and leads the global education practice there. She's an economist from MIT. And she has been leading the publications, several publications, the last one on education to employment, designing a system that works. Is a report that just came out, and I'm sure Mona is going to be talking about it. Then we have Mr. Naceur Ammar. He was the former Minister of Communications and Technology in Tunisia, and also one of the partners of the TAC Foundation, the TAC initiative. He's going to tell us about this important initiative. He has had many high-level positions in academia, both in Tunisia and in France. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ammar. And then we have Dr. Saeed Aidi, but I don't see him in the Hangout. I guess we have to wait until he joins.
Hi, David. He's still not in the office yet. He's getting there. So as soon as he joins, we'll put him online. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to each of the panelists, and then we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience over there, but also questions that we are receiving through our social media. Let me start then with Mona. Mona, the question that we have for you, and that is related to this study that McKinsey just finalized, showing how prevalent is this problem of skills mismatches. What do you think that this problem exists, and why is that employers, if they don't find the skills in the labor force, cannot simply develop training programs on their own and fix this issue of skills mismatches? What do you think are the constraints?
So there are probably a couple of pieces to this question. So first and foremost, in terms of what are the skills that employers find that are lacking. As part of our survey, we actually asked that question about to what extent do you believe that graduates have the appropriate skill readiness of employers. We asked it to youth, and we asked it to education providers. And what's quite interesting is that when you ask the question to education providers, across about 20 hard and soft skills, they say that everything is important. So there's very little prioritization on the part of education providers in terms of one skill set being more important than another. When you ask that question of employers, they come out very strongly saying that there are a set of soft skills, so around work ethic, teamwork, that comes out at the top. In some countries you find that hard skills, so actual technical competence in the discipline, comes out strongly as well. And when you ask the question to youth, again, you find almost no differentiation. So the first observation is that there is a fundamental disconnect in terms of what skills these three groups of youth, education providers, and employers think that contributes to the state that we're in. Now, to the second part of the question of so why don't employers just come up with their own training programs? What are they doing to solve this? We found that there were we, for example, looked at over 100 cases of employers doing something in terms of either going into secondary schools or working with vocational providers or with universities to shape programs that would produce the kinds of workers that they wanted. Tremendous corporate training programs that would bridge between what school taught them and what they need for their particular employment. But we find that only 1/3 of employers globally are doing this. There's about another 1/4 of employers that are trying to do something, another 25% who are trying to do something but are not very effective, and then there's about 40+% that are doing absolutely nothing, and they're obviously getting the worst results, and the ones who are because and it's a consequence of their action. So what I would say is that where we have seen this work the best in terms of employers, education providers, and youth working together, we've seen examples that are smaller. So it'll work for perhaps 1,000 students at best. You very rarely find it working for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of students. And what I would say at the level, so it would be, for example, the automotive sector saying, and leaders in that industry saying, we need to crack our talent pipeline, and working with education providers in their geography to create the right program for youth, and guaranteeing youth that they would get interviews, or in some cases even guaranteeing that they would get jobs if they graduated in good standing. We've seen examples in India of large training providers who have a network, and as well as 1,000 employers with whom they literally guarantee jobs before they begin the training. So it's this kind of intensity of interaction that has to happen on a daily basis between education providers in order to get to solutions that work at scale. There are just not enough of these examples in the world today. And so that's why we see the plethora of problem which we see around the world.
We are not hearing you, David. Not yet.
I think David was muted. Can you unmute your microphone on top of your screen?
Okay, David.
I'm okay now.
There we go. Thank you.
You can hear me. So I was thanking Mona for her answer, and I was saying that I'm going to get back to her with another question in a bit related to this issue. But let me move to Branka now. Branka, you and Manpower just finalized this report on youth unemployment, and you talk about several of the things that governments can do to help youth find jobs. And of course, one of the interventions are these intermediation services, right? Trying to connect youth to mainly wage employment. All the countries in the Middle East and North Africa regions have these employment offices trying to do this, but they're not working well. A question for you is, do you think we still need this type of public interventions, or the private sector can manage this issue of matching on its own?
Thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me to this virtual event. I'm very excited because this is my first of this kind. I'm joining you from Miami. It's really nice. It's really nice weather here, but I wish I were in Istanbul because my mom was born in Istanbul. So I wish I were actually present there. So anyway, we have done a number of studies and research, and also experienced in practice the issues related to youth unemployment and also youth development. And what we have found, and you know that, David, it's in your research also, that the best approaches to youth development are comprehensive. So they combine various interventions, such as job skill training, soft skill training, job experience, either internships or apprenticeships, entrepreneurship skills training, civic engagement of youth, job matching or intermediation, mentoring, and peer-to-peer coaching, just to mention some of them. Okay, now if we examine this list, none of these interventions can be successful unless it is performed in cooperation with the businesses. And let me explain why. How can you do a successful job skills training program unless you know what are the job skills that actually employers need and will need in the short to medium term? How can you, like Mona was suggesting, focus on the right soft skill training if you don't know the priorities that employers put on specific soft skills? And then on the other side, how can you have a good job experience that matches your training unless you engage employers and they provide internships or apprenticeships or other job experience opportunities? And finally, mentoring, which is so important for successful youth development, where your mentors have to come also from those businesses. So it is obvious that the key to successful youth development programs has to be grounded in the reality of labor market conditions and has to be done in public-private partnerships with employers. So let's focus now specifically on job matching and why most public employment services and also youth-serving NGOs fail in this area. Well, you know that I belong to the ManpowerGroup, and we are one of the largest employment services, privately owned employment services in the world. We operate in 82 countries, so we obviously see thousands of employers who come to us and millions of candidates who come to us, and we do a successful job matching. That's our core competency as a business. So what we have seen over the years, why this has become so difficult to do well, is that the complexity of each job today requires a very careful analysis of an open position. It used to be maybe 20 years ago, when I was already in this industry, that an employer will call and ask for an administrative assistant that types fast and accurate, okay? And that was the job description. Today, when an employer calls, even for a simple administrative position, that position could have 70 different skills. So the complexity of jobs has really increased tremendously over the years. Now, for you to identify an ideal candidate for that position, you really need to maximize the matching between the candidate competencies with the position requirements. And that's where the problem is. First of all, we don't have a universal standard language for describing the skills and describing the requirements of a job. So many times, the way the candidate describes its skills or an organization describes a good candidate does not match the same language that a company uses to describe a position. Let me give you a simple example that happened recently. Cisco got involved in Texas to try to take military personnel who is retiring from a military with very high-level technical skills with potential employers who are their vendors and suppliers and who ask for those high-level technical skills. They saw a tremendous difference in the way the military describes the same skills that these employers needed. And employers were not finding the right candidates. There was a totally total mismatch because of the language. The other thing is that young people don't have a track record of experience. There is no references, recommendation letters, and therefore the employers have a tremendous mistrust that these young people will not be able to perform on the job, to behave properly on the job, and really be productive. So for us, if we want to present a young candidate to an employer, even if it's a very good candidate, you need to sell that candidate to the employer. And selling skills, presentation skills, are usually not something that public employment service staff and also NGO youth development organization staff does have or does train for. Those are usually people who are more trained to work with candidates, to have good counseling skills, coaching skills, career guidance skills, but not necessarily to have the skills how to engage employers, analyze requirements, and then present candidates to the employer. So that's another reason why these public employment services and NGOs are not necessarily as successful in presenting the candidates to the employer. So what is the solution? We have some really good examples where the public employment services partnered with some other intermediaries, such as the privately owned employment services, employment agencies, and they outsourced not the whole employment service concept, but just certain parts of it, such as job matching. For example, in France, the French public employment service, they work for years. Since 1984, they have been working with privately owned agencies. And what they do is when there are individuals who are unemployed for a certain period of time, they refer them to the private agencies, and 84% of those candidates get jobs in less than 3 months. So it's good for the individual, it's good for the employer, it's good for the public service, and it's good for the private agency. Everybody wins in this partnership. We have also worked on a similar type of partnership in Morocco with ANAPEC. And although there was at first some resistance, to work together, they opened up and it was successful. So there are very good examples of where this can work. Let me give you another example. In Serbia, in the country where I came from, there is this network of youth offices, and I know a similar network of youth offices exists in several countries in Middle East and North Africa. We worked with the government to actually do train the trainer in those offices for youth coordinators who are then helping young people and preparing them for employment. So it doesn't have to be always an outsourced service. It could be also working in partnership and transferring some of the knowledge and best practices from the public sector to from the private to the public sector. And finally, I also wanted to tell you about an organization that I find very successful in putting young people to work in Middle East, the Education for Employment Foundation. You know that they work with employers to get commitments for jobs before they even start training the candidates. So they work very closely with employers. But recently they came to us and they asked that we provide to them a sales training, an employer engagement training over a period of 6 months for all their staff and executives in order to fine-tune their skills how to work with employers, understanding better employers. So I think that it is very important that the public and the private sector works together, that there is an open mind, and that we all pool our strengths to help the young people successfully enter the labor market. So that's it for me now.
Thank you very much, Branka. Let me move now to Mr. Ammar. Mr. Ammar, given your knowledge, of course, of your country, Tunisia, but also the region, what do you think are the opportunities in terms of creating partnerships with the private sector, so public-private partnerships, this time not to manage programs to deliver services, but to create the jobs themselves? And can you tell us a little bit about the TAC initiative?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation to this session. As far as I'm not very fluent in English, I will try to speak to you in French, and I have next to me Mr. Gizgiz who is going to translate. Bonjour tout le monde. Je voudrais d'abord, compte tenu du panorama que David vient de décrire dans la région MENA, parler spécifiquement du cas de la Tunisie. Alors, le cas de la Tunisie, c'est un peu différent, parce que c'est d'abord un petit pays d'à peine 10-11 millions d'habitants, et qui n'a pas beaucoup de ressources naturelles, et qui a misé depuis plus de 50 ans sur l'éducation. Donc à tel point que le pays souffre, le plus grand mal du pays actuellement, c'est le chômage des diplômés du supérieur. Nous comptons actuellement plus de 200 000 diplômés de l'enseignement supérieur en état de chômage. Évidemment, donc, quelle est la solution pour que la Tunisie, évidemment, puisse mener une politique de développement de pair avec ces problématiques d'emploi des jeunes, dans un contexte marqué par la mondialisation, d'un environnement de plus en plus concurrentiel? Il n'y a guère de salut pour le secteur privé que de miser sur des marchés plus larges, des marchés tournés vers l'Europe, vers la région, une région, donc l'Afrique du Nord ou l'Afrique en général, vers des secteurs à plus forte valeur ajoutée, donc pour offrir plus d'opportunités aux jeunes diplômés du supérieur, et vers une plus grande productivité avec des ressources humaines évidemment compétentes et qualifiées. Donc là, je vais donner la parole à Monsieur Gizgiz pour traduire un peu cette première intervention.
Hello everyone. Well, the case of Tunisia is different from the other regions, especially the MENA regions, because, as you probably know, it's a very small country with limited natural resources, and that's why, since independence, we put the emphasis on education and valorization of human resources. But the problem is that we did so well that now we are suffering from an opposite result, as we have a very high rate of unemployed among the university graduates, about 200,000 actually. The solution is not easy to find in a context which is characterized by mondialization, by savage competition everywhere, a competitive environment, and the development of the private sector is not following as it should. So this, what we are trying to do now is to target larger markets like Europe, like Africa, like North Africa, like the Middle East countries, new sectors with a high added value and and the higher productivity through qualified and competent human resources. Mr. Ammar, to you.
Maintenant, pour donner des exemples concrets, donc de partenariats public-privé pour justement donc apporter des solutions concrètes au problème du chômage des diplômés de l'enseignement supérieur, je veux faire un focus sur une expérience pilote menée depuis mars 2011. Alors, le démarrage de cette expérience pilote, en fait, est bien antérieur. Bon, là, je salue la présence de Mona, de McKinsey, parce que, donc, depuis 2010, McKinsey a mené une étude sur les perspectives offertes par l'offshoring, donc, dans le secteur des technologies de l'information en Tunisie. Et les conclusions de cette étude donner des perspectives de création d'emplois qualifiés se situent entre 10 000 et 15 000 emplois qualifiés par an pour les prochaines années. Le problème est que cette étude s'est arrêtée avec la révolution et que une dizaine d'acteurs clés dans l'offshoring en la matière ont pris l'initiative de créer une association qui s'appelle TACT, Tunisian Association for Communication Technologies. And l'objectif derrière la création de cette association, c'est de prendre à bras le corps un peu le problème, croyant donc en des perspectives réelles pour promouvoir la Tunisie comme une destination de l'offshoring dans les technologies de l'information. Alors, évidemment, donc ce problème pour promouvoir l'offshoring revêt différentes facettes. Il y a certes des problèmes d'infrastructure de qualité, des problèmes d'incentives ou d'avantages, d'incitation de toutes sortes, fiscales ou autres, accordées par l'État. Mais là où le bas blesse, en fait, c'est la profondeur du vivier des talents qu'on appelle offshore ready, c'est-à-dire des jeunes qualifiés à même de répondre rapidement dans un délai d'une année à des investisseurs qui viennent s'installer pour créer de l'emploi qualifié donc dans le secteur des technologies de l'information. Alors, on partait d'une situation où ces acteurs de l'offshoring, en fait, faisaient du turnover, c'est-à-dire qu'ils s'arrachaient entre eux, ils étaient dans une situation de concurrence et ils se piquaient entre les talents. Et la création de cette association a changé la donne. Ils se sont dit, nous ne sommes plus concurrents, nous pouvons créer des ressources qualifiées pour tout le monde et nous pouvons même en créer pour attirer d'autres acteurs en matière de ressources humaines. De là est venue l'initiative TACT Academy. Il y a eu un rapprochement entre TACT et un opérateur dans la formation, dans l'université, qui est une école d'ingénieurs privée qui s'appelle Esprit. Et on s'est dit, voilà, ensemble, on peut mettre des conditions pour justement donc mener une expérience pilote pour montrer qu'on peut donc qualifier les jeunes pour qu'ils soient employables rapidement et répondre à des besoins donc d'emploi donc dans le secteur de l'ITO. Alors cette expérience pilote a démarré en septembre 2011 avec près de 200 jeunes chômeurs qui ont une moyenne de 1 à 2 ans de chômage. Et on a conçu ensemble, entre l'université et les principaux acteurs qui ont créé de l'emploi, donc un programme de formation qui s'étale sur 10 mois, donc 6 mois de formation à l'université, qui se termine par un stage d'insertion de 4 mois au sein des entreprises. Et on a associé le ministère, évidemment. Et là où l'expérience a été pilote de tout point de vue, c'est que on a créé un vrai partenariat public-privé, dans le sens où l'État s'est engagé à financer un peu cette opération sur la base des résultats de l'insertion effective des jeunes dans l'emploi créé par cette dizaine d'entreprises, que les entreprises s'engagent à recruter ces jeunes au terme de leur formation pour peu qu'ils atteignent un niveau minimum de certification et de compétences attesté par des tiers, et l'université, elle s'est engagée, donc mue par dans le cadre d'une action citoyenne pour dire, je vais faire cette formation à prix coûtant, mais je ne me ferai rembourser les frais de cette formation que si j'atteins les résultats traduits par la certification des compétences de ces jeunes au terme de leur formation. Donc cette formation a été couronnée par un succès puisqu'on a atteint donc un taux de succès de 80%, traduit par des certifications aussi bien en termes de soft skills, linguistiques, en anglais et en français, mais également des certifications technologiques attendues par les recruteurs.
Well, as we were saying, the problem was how to face this new problem of highly educated people, but who cannot find a job, because our market is very narrow, and the students were not adapted to the needs of the labor market. Starting from the study of McKinsey, which MENA knows very well. I say hello to her now. And starting from this experience, from this report, there was the constitution of an association named TACT, Tunisian Association for Communication and Technology, which is concretely an association of 10 IT companies operating on the offshore under the offshore regime. These companies all have a great need for qualified and highly qualified manpower, but they cannot find it among this stock of unemployed people from the university. So the idea was how to train these people in a short time and adapt them to the needs of these companies. And these companies now are changing from competition, snatching to each other the competencies, to partner enterprises who will work together to train people on specific fields which each company needs. So first there was a needs analysis which was done through these enterprises, what they need as qualifications from the technical field and the linguistic field, mainly English and French languages. On another hand, how to choose a good university that will be a partner, but not really the commercial partner who will come here just to earn money. To earn money, sure, but on the basis of achievement results. So the contract was that this university will not be paid before ensuring that all the people who have been trained are inserted, and it will be paid according to the number of people who are inserted in the labor market. The government encouraged this action by financing it completely, but only at the end of the training. The training lasted 1 year, 6 months of theoretical study at the university, French, English, and computer science subjects, and then 4 months of internship. And among about 1,000 people at the start, 180 were selected, and 80% of them in the period of 1 year were certified in TOEIC for English, TEF in French, and many other technical certifications, Java, Microsoft, etc. And when they were recruited by these enterprises, then the university, Esprit, was reimbursed for its investment. This was a pilot experience that we led together, but it's not the last. There will be others, and it will be continued through this academy, this TACT Academy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think I give you some topics about what is happening in Tunisia in terms of qualified people and to how to match, I mean, the competencies or skills required by the enterprise. David.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Ammar. Let me go back to Mona with a difficult question, actually. As I was saying at the beginning, Mona, 60% of youth in the Middle East and North Africa region who today are looking for a job have not even finished high school, and only 5% have a university diploma. Among them, 40% are in jobs that do not use their skills. What would you suggest? What would you suggest to governments in the region to develop public-private programs to reskill these youth, to give them the skills they really need to be able to get better, more productive jobs?
Mona, we can't hear you. Are you off mute?
So I am unmuting, but then the Prem's jobs mutes me. So
Okay, no,
Am I
you're
fine
good.
now?
You're good
Okay.
now. Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Let's come to that very important question, which is, what do you do, right? So literally 1 in 4 youth in the region is unemployed. And on top of that, let's just be very clear, all youth are not the same. So there are youth that don't even make it to high school. There are youth who drop out of high school and don't make it to university. There are those who graduate from university and go on to get a PhD and end up driving taxi. We have lots of different categories of youth. And so my first observation is that we need to be very clear about these different youth segments and create interventions to support each one, because what's going to support the university graduate is not the same thing that's going to support the high school or secondary school dropouts. So that is the first thing. Second thing, what I was saying earlier about sector-wide collaborations, which we've just heard about in the Tunisian example of this. For example, if you take industries or sectors that have very large populations of frontline service workers, so let's say it is retail, we need to be able to bring together the leaders and essentially leading companies in multiple sectors and identify what it is that we can do, not just with those companies themselves, but even working down on their supply chain to a volume of jobs that where there is a skill need, where you can then have the kinds of public-private partnerships that we've just been talking about, so be it with either public education providers or with private to fill that need. But it has to happen at a sector level. It is not going to work to try to do it company by company. It will just take too long and we will not get the impact that we need. Third thing is that we need to be able to understand whether we're making progress. Really getting the support of parents, community, and youth. And this is what I mean by that. Just because training is made available does not mean that youth want it. In fact, through our survey, we found, for example, that 20% of youth in India or in Turkey say, there's training, but it's just not very valuable. We don't see what comes out of it. And you also have things cost money. And so before a family puts forward funds to train their child, they want to know that there's a job on the other end. And so this is why it's so crucial to, first of all, be able to make very clear that these jobs do exist vis-a-vis these sector collaborations, that the training cost, so let's say it's going to be $100 for the training, the starting salary, so it needs to be $100 a month for the job into debt to provide training that is better than what they see in many programs in order to get their child a job, but then there's no job on the other line, right? So that equation has to be very transparent to parents and to youth if they're going to partake in the kinds of training options that we're talking about. Just because it's there doesn't mean that they're going to partake in it. What I would finally say is that on the side, so far we have talked about what do we need on the employer side. We've talked about what do we need in terms of does training make sense from the perspective of youth and parents. And then on the government side, there can be all kinds of efforts in terms of, either being a funding partner in these sector-wide collaborations, or it can be with regards to being able to just even provide data around what is youth, so are they actually achieving employability, and then broadcasting that so that it's very clear and encourages other sectors to partake in similar exercises. We need to be able to hit it from these multiple angles for the different populations of youth that I just described. So there are some youth who need better information, and that will help them. There are some youth who need information and funding, and that's what's going to help them. There are some youth that are going to need information, funding, and a lot of coaching support to keep them in school, and that's what's going to help them. So you have to be able to identify the sector opportunities that can create a large quantum of jobs. We have to be able to pre-guarantee those jobs, work with a set of education providers to create relevant programs, market to youth and to their parents so that they see the value of this training in terms of the job opportunity, and then have data to be able to show that we are making a difference significantly with regards to these types of interventions. And that's a full pack to be needed if we're going to change the tragic situation that we have in the region today.
Thank you very much, Mona, for these very specific suggestions. Branka, one more question for you. You were talking about the importance of outsourcing certain services to the private sector. I'm talking about the employment offices. And this is a way to substitute for the lack of skills of the staff in these offices, but also addressing the problem I was discussing at the beginning, that the staff in these offices might not have the incentives to address the needs of youth and employers. Now, how do we know that the private sector in countries in the Middle East and North Africa region are going to do this better? What are the types of incentives you need to give to these providers of private services to do their job well? What types of contracts, if you want?
There's definitely need to be mutual benefit and understanding between all parties involved for a public-private partnership to be successful. And when we analyzed where does it work well, you know that there are countries where youth unemployment is high, but even a bigger problem is the fact that the youth unemployment is a multiple of the national employment rate. There are only very few countries in the world where the youth unemployment is very similar to the adult unemployment rate, which means that young people in those countries have equal opportunity for the existing jobs as any other part of the population. They're not a disadvantaged group. And when we look at those countries, such as Germany and Netherlands and Switzerland and so on, Norway, what is obvious is that these countries are very focused on the dual training model, where the training is married with job experience with the employers. And the role of the government in these situations is not necessarily to provide all the services themselves, but rather to be a connector, a coordinator, a facilitator, an enabler, a data information provider, and also a knowledge sharing resource. So I think that public employment services have to recognize that with the changing complexity of the labor markets, the governments have to play a different role in it. Just like companies today are outsourcing certain parts of their business when it's not their core competency, and that makes them more effective and more efficient. By the same token, the new governments, those that want to be very efficient in delivering services to their citizens, have to recognize that it's better for them to have this changing role while they're outsourcing certain important parts to private sector providers. What would make those private actors interested is obviously to have some kind of a benefit, that is. And that benefit doesn't always have to come in the form of grants or financial contracts. It could also be something related to taxes, something related to their access to information, to access to good candidates for their client companies, and so on. So there are ways to structure these deals that is not necessarily just paying, the government pays for each placement. There are a number of other ways to do this that are very creative and very successful in practice.
Thank you very much, Branka. And going back to you, Mr. Ammar, with the last question, then we're going to open the floor to the audience. We have been talking so far about things that can be done to create wage employment, basically. Larger companies in certain sectors creating the jobs. But another important issue is what happens with youth who want to start a business, who want to become self-employed. In fact, self-employment might be an important source of jobs for many of these youth. What do you think are the types of partnerships that can be created to facilitate self-employment and small-scale entrepreneurship? Mr. Ammar, are you there?
You're on mute, please. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes. Donc, do you hear me now?
Thank you.
Votre question donc concerne un peu donc le rôle des grandes entreprises pour dans la création donc de l'emploi qualifié pour des jeunes entrepreneurs, des entreprises individuelles ou autres, c'est bien ça?
C'est ça.
Eh bien donc on vient de parler de l'externalisation. L'externalisation pourrait être un vecteur justement pour promouvoir ce genre de création d'entreprises, des auto-entrepreneurs. Ceci ne peut se passer qu'à travers la création d'un écosystème dit entrepreneurial. Donc, un écosystème qui incite à l'innovation et qui réunit plusieurs acteurs. Bon, certes, il y a le gouvernement, donc comme vient de le dire Branka, à travers un peu l'État, le gouvernement facilitateur, mais pas opérateur, mais d'autres acteurs, donc qui peuvent être des acteurs dans la formation académique, dans la formation professionnelle, dans la recherche, des branches professionnelles sectorielles, en fait, des PME. Donc, comment créer cet écosystème qui est un écosystème qui favorise donc la création de jeunes entrepreneurs, l'incubation. Et je pense que la création de clusters ou de technopoles pourrait favoriser ça. Donc, je peux citer une expérience menée par un grand opérateur que je nommerai pas pour ne pas lui faire de la pub. Il y a donc un opérateur téléphonique en Tunisie qui a lancé une expérience dite Startup Factory qui vise justement donc à mettre en place via un partenariat donc avec l'université d'un côté, des PME, des PMI, des branches professionnelles, des ONG, un climat qui favorise justement l'émergence de jeunes entrepreneurs autodidactes dans son domaine d'activité.
Thank you for your question. I think it's about the role of large enterprises in the creation of smaller ones and in the development of self-employment. Well, a lot of experiences have been tried in Tunisia, and there is a encouragement on the part of government for this kind of experiences. It consists in the outsourcing of some processes, accountancy, computing, etc. of big enterprises within small enterprises or just individual people who work at home. And as an example, we have a telecommunication enterprise, which I will not name, not to make an advertisement for it, which create a network of small enterprises to outsource many of its activities. And many people profited from this experience and now are small entrepreneurs or even medium enterprises. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Ammar. I'm going to now open the floor to questions from the audience, and I have also several questions that are coming through the internet. I will read them at the end, but why don't we start with questions from the audience?
Diego? Okay.
Hi, we have one question from the Director General of ANETI, which is the Public Employment Agency, Mohamed Naceur Ammar. He's saying not every company owner is ready or prepared to define their needs in the short or long terms as far as skills is concerned. Do you think, he asked, it is recommended to design and implement programs, one, to increase the awareness of companies on the importance of human resource management by skills and to help them to define their needs? Also, should we train the unemployed on job readiness skills?
Branka, why don't you take that question?
Okay. First of all, definitely train the unemployed on work readiness skills, because we also have to change the attitude of young people where they expect somebody to give them a job. We have to train young people to rely on themselves, to take accountability for their job search. But if we do that, we are also obliged to equip them with the right skills to do so. So the second part of the question, definitely agree with you, sir. We need to train young people for work readiness. Regarding should we also promote with employers their participation and their engagement is necessary for helping young people reach jobs? Yes, absolutely. There are ways to do this. We need to show to the employers the return on investment that they will have if they employ young people. For example, it is known that companies who employ young talent are more creative and more innovative. It is obvious that young people have tremendous social networks, and therefore they influence their peers in using specific products or services. And the millennials are in 2017 will become the group with the highest budget as a consumer consumer market. So employers have to see that they have a vested interest to participate in youth development programs and that they will benefit from that. Why some employers don't define properly their skills? You are right again. Some of them don't even know how to do this. So the government there can actually be a guidance for employers to properly define and forecast their skills. And we have worked very closely with a number of governments in the world in this process, how to survey employers and how to understand the existing and forecast the skills that are needed.
Thank you very much, Branka. Other questions from the audience? Diego?
We don't have more questions from the audience so far.
Okay. Let me then read a couple of questions that we have received through the internet. We have Jessica from India who is asking, how will public-private partnership address issues related to gender? Are there special issues that need to be done to address the need of women, young women? Muna, would you like to take this question?
Sure. I mean, an example actually that is from the region. So in Saudi, there is an entity now called Glowworks. And what Glowworks does is that it specifically targets females. And it tries to be a bridge between the work environment conditions for women in the kingdom and ensuring that they are able to interview appropriately, as well as have a platform with regards to being able to work from home. So what they're essentially trying to do is to say there are talented young women that are simply not able to access job opportunities in the same way. And so what can we do to help the matching for women, as well as what can we do to actually create platforms whereby they can work more easily from home than what is the case otherwise. And so they're literally trying to create a talent pool to serve the needs of employers. So that is just one example. We have also seen in other countries with regards to targeting women who have had to drop out of school in order to work. So what can be done to bridge them back into school or back into the workforce, but at a job which is going to be higher paying and require more skill than what they're currently doing, which is unskilled. So we've seen programs like that in India as well. So these are just two examples of types of programs to target females specifically.
Thank you, Muna. There is another question. Maybe this question is for you, Mr. Ammar. Is somebody writing from Rwanda, and the question is that we have been talking about policies to help people get the skills they need to find a job now. But what can be done? What type of partnerships can we have to make sure that people continue to learn while they work, basically on the job training?
Merci pour la question. Donc, je peux justement l'expérience que nous venons de mener au sein de TACT Academy a montré quand les entreprises qui créent de l'emploi se rapprochent des opérateurs de la formation, on peut essayer de corriger un peu les imperfections de l'université en termes de qualification, donc à la sortie du diplôme, pour former rapidement des jeunes pour être insérés dans le marché de l'emploi rapidement, à travers un peu les qualifications attendues par l'entreprise. Évidemment, ceci n'est pas suffisant. Ceci n'est pas suffisant parce que si on continue à corriger les imperfections des diplômés qui sortent de l'université, c'est une perte d'argent. Il faut remonter la chaîne à l'amont pour que l'université interagisse avec le monde de l'emploi à travers des mécanismes, comme vient de le dire Branka, de l'alternance, des mises de curricula communs, donc comme c'est fait en Allemagne, pour que le jeune, justement, sorte non seulement avec un diplôme, mais avec des qualifications recherchées par l'entreprise, qu'il soit même engagé bien avant l'octroi du diplôme, mais donc aussi en remontant à l'aval, parce que dans des secteurs comme les technologies de l'information, on ne peut pas se contenter de cette formation qui touche les technologies d'aujourd'hui ou bien de demain, alors que c'est un secteur qui évolue rapidement et qu'on parle du concept de la formation tout au long de la vie. Donc le concept de la formation continue, de la formation qualifiante, et ce rapprochement entre l'université et les entreprises qui, au départ, sert pour justement qualifier les jeunes pour leur premier emploi, permet de tisser d'autres partenariats qui s'inscrivent dans la durée, à moyen et à long terme, pour justement accompagner les besoins de l'entreprise pour requalifier les jeunes et pour maintenir un peu les connaissances au diapason du développement et de l'évolution technologique.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Ammar. There is another question coming from through the social media, and maybe this one is for you, Branka.
Can I translate what
so sorry. Yes, I'm so sorry. Please translate.
Okay, yeah. Well, the experience of TACT Academy is a very pertinent one, since it gave very good results and it allowed us to correct the errors that were made during the training and to bridge the gap between the needs of the company and the competences of the graduates. But this is a very, very costly solution, and I think that the best solution would be upstream at the university level, to have a good contact between university and the enterprise through dual training, for example, or joint curricula, so that the students, when they get out of the university, are ready to go to the job. But this, again, is not enough. You need some other solutions downstream. That is, once these people are recruited, as technologies are changing very, very quickly, so you need continuous training or lifelong training. So in order to fit and to be always ready to follow the change of technology.
Thank you very much. So I was saying that we have another question. This one comes from South Africa, Mr. Tokoso. And I think this question is for you, Branka. It says, poor youth have smartphones. Can they use social media or mobile services to find jobs?
Oh, my favorite question. Technology is definitely on our side in this area. I think that smartphones, social media, websites, platforms online can really be very, very successful and can help us a lot to replicate our efforts in connecting youth with jobs. Let me give you a few examples. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization called Suktel, but they have developed a very good service which connects young people with jobs over text messaging. And they have actually increased the speed with which young people get jobs in many markets where this was taking months or weeks. They have decreased that by a factor of 7 to 9. So definitely there's also free apps that are in the App Store, that's such as Find My Job, that can help you put your skills, and that connects you with employers who are on internet looking for those skills. So yes, I definitely believe that technology can help us bridge this gap.
Thank you very much, Branka. I don't know if there are other questions from the audience before I continue to read the ones coming through the internet. We cannot hear. We didn't hear that.
Sorry. Hi, David. We actually have some questions from here. And we received one question via Twitter, actually, which I would like, I don't know who would be most appropriate to answer it. And the question is this: how can policymakers in the Arab world make sure that not only youth are trained, but also that their training will help their countries better compete in the international economy? And they also go on asking, should countries first assess their economic comparative advantage before creating training? Thank you.
I guess this one goes to you, Mona.
Sure. So essentially, what's critical with any training is that there's going to be a large volume of end of it. And so understanding what is happening with regards to different sectors where job opportunities are being created, where they're stagnant, is an absolute core ingredient. And I think the example of the business offshoring, which is the case of Tunisia, is a precise example of that, right? You know, so where are the jobs going to be growing, and then creating a pool of people such that they are fit for purpose for those jobs. So it's in these areas we're eager to want to partake in supporting youth. I mean, I will posit something, which is, you know, there is no such thing in my mind as convincing employers to do training unless they actually feel a business demand that is a consequence of having poorly trained people, or they feel the consequence of not having sufficient people and how that affects their growth. So unless there is a real business need, then training doesn't have a counterpart. Understanding where the job growth is in the economy is absolutely crucial before embarking on this kind of an effort.
Thank you, Mona. Are there other questions from Istanbul? We still have 10 minutes, around 10 minutes.
Sorry, David, there's currently no questions.
No question. So let me read one more question that we got, this one from Italy, and I don't know who wants to answer this one. It said, can we create public-private partnerships to develop or to create jobs for the green economy, green jobs? Monsieur Ammar?
Oui, donc pour cette question, en fait, en tant que responsable d'une formation d'ingénieur, Green Jobs, ça renvoie au développement durable en général, à la protection de l'environnement, donc à l'agriculture bio, etc. Et je pense que aussi bien en formation initiale, donc à l'université, ceci doit être une composante transversale dans toute formation pour éduquer un peu les jeunes à l'avenir au concept un peu du développement durable, à la préservation de l'environnement. Donc il ne s'agit pas d'éduquer un secteur particulier. Le développement durable, c'est pas quelque chose de sectoriel, on le trouve presque partout, dans les technologies de l'information, dans la santé, dans l'agriculture. Et ça doit être une composante un peu transversale, donc qui peut relever un peu des soft skills dont on vient de parler. Et bon, qu'à défaut de l'avoir, évidemment, dans ces formations, c'est une formation qui devrait être présente dans toute formation qui vise un peu justement des nouvelles qualifications à l'avenir.
As a responsible of an engineering school, I think that green energy is a horizontal competence that should be acquired by all students, whatever their specialty is. It's not just a specialty for civil engineering or for mechanics. It's a competence that's really horizontal, and that fits for in all specialties. For example, in information technology, engineers have to have this competency. And if we have to make them sensitive to this new development, the lasting development, then we have to teach all students this competence, just like any other soft skill, language, or any other thing.
Thank you very much. I think these are the main questions we have received so far. No additional questions from Istanbul?
No additional questions at this time.
Okay. There is just the last one. Oh, this is an interesting question, and it's either for Muna or for Branka. This came from Twitter. What about learning and training, free learning programs online?
All right, let me try to address that first, and then Mona maybe can complement. We have seen in practice that pure online training, just online courses, don't give the best results. That combining online training with facilitation, classroom facilitation, actually brings better results, and experiential learning is extremely important. However, as I understand, there are new attempts to actually create online courses that are facilitated and that are virtual classrooms that are much more sophisticated than what we used to call online courses, and therefore that is definitely technology, and the use of online resources is definitely the future. The other thing that helps a lot are communities that help young people to reach to mentors and to their peers, and peer-to-peer coaching over online platforms. So that has been our experience. So Mona, I don't know if you have something to help me here.
So I would certainly agree that what's traditionally been online, which is, you essentially are the recipient of content, but there's very little interaction, is changing. I mean, so if you look at MITx, where you can actually hold seminar-like formats, and you also have peers actually grading each other's papers or giving a perspective on each other's papers. Online is becoming increasingly interactive. What I would also say, though, is I think that there are certain types of skills content that lend themselves more to online than do others. So, for example, things that are much more standardized, or things where it's almost entirely an online experience. It's something like coding and Code Academy, which I'm sure many of you have experienced and heard about. So there are certain things that are easier to be able to experience online. to provide the appropriate skills provided for free. There are, I think, different models being experimented with. How do the providers turn this into a self-sustaining proposition, though? And so there is, for example, charging a finder's fee to the employer for providing a pool of talent. So all of these things are nascent experiments. I think the coming 2 to 3 years is going to be quite instructive in terms of which of these types of experiments survive, and more importantly, what their results are in terms of generating.
Thank you, Branka and Mona. Let me try to summarize very briefly this very rich discussion. Unless, Diego, I see you are there in the screen, you have something to announce or say?
No, David, basically, please wrap up. Then I'm going to just give a very final closing remark.
Okay, so I want to very briefly, I think we have been talking here about two types of partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. Partnerships to improve the delivery of active labor market programs, such as training or intermediation services, but then also partnerships to directly create jobs. So in terms of the partnerships to improve the delivery of services, let me start with the training, what to do to improve the skills that youth need to enter in the labor market. Mona was making very specific points about this. First of all, the need to differentiate the needs of different groups. Not all youth are the same. Also very important, the need to identify demands at a sectoral level, that this is not something that can be solved going one company to the next. There have to be sectoral strategies for skills development. The important role that parents and communities have. This is not because the programs are there is going to be demand for the programs. How do we educate people about the importance of investing in skills, and how we improve also the expectations that they have, knowing that if they receive a certain type of training, the jobs are going to be there for them. And then the role of the government, mainly as the provider of funding, also the provider of information, not necessarily the provider of the training. When we come to matching and intermediation services, Branka was telling us about the importance of outsourcing at least part of the functions to the private sector. But then there are certain conditions for the private providers to be able to respond to the needs of youth and employers. They need to have a universal language to define what are the characteristics and the skills need of a specific job. This is, sometimes we take this for granted, but Branka was telling us as jobs become more and more complex, it is important to have this typology to be able to characterize jobs. The need also, this came from the audience, the need to train employers to learn better about human resource policies and how themselves identify what are the needs they have in terms of skills. And then the issue of how to create contracts with the private sector that provide incentives to, again, address the needs of youth and employers. And here is not only about paying on the basis of performance. Branka was also telling us about other types of incentives, like tax incentives, that can be considered to again, get the private sector to deliver the services that are needed. And of course, the role of new technologies, mobile phones, and virtual exchanges to facilitate the flow of information in the labor market. Finally, when it comes to the creation of jobs themselves, Mr. Ammar was telling us about the TAC initiative. This sometimes can be controversial, but it seems something that governments need to take seriously. The need to identify specific sectors where there is potential to create jobs. It can be the information sector, but it can be other sectors, and then facilitate, mobilize investment to the sectors. That would be the role of the government, provide the financing, maybe the infrastructure, and of course mobilize the human resources and make sure that the training programs are there to create the skills needed for those jobs. The risk here is how to make sure we don't choose sectors that basically are not competitive and that where the jobs created are not going to be sustainable. But again, it's an issue that governments need to consider, need to address. And then finally, the issue of self-employment. There might not be wage employment for all youth. Self-employment, small-scale entrepreneurship is going to be an important source of jobs. And again, Mr. Ammar was telling us about how to create an ecosystem that facilitates or promotes entrepreneurship. It includes, again, the private sector has a very important role, providing mentoring, advisory services, training, access to credit, and how to link these small companies, how to integrate them into larger value chains. Again, the private sector has a very important role to play there. This is what I have to say in terms of the summary of the main ideas. I want to thank the panelists for joining us today. Unfortunately, we cannot see the audience, so that is one of the problems of these Hangouts, but it has been a pleasure to be here with you today. And Diego, the floor is yours.
Okay, first of all, David, thank you very much for the excellent moderation, and thank you very much to the distinguished speakers for the valuable expositions that you have made. On behalf of the MENA Community of Practice, we thank you for this virtual session. We have here in Istanbul, in this launching of the MENA Community of Practice, Director Generals from active labor market policies, from employment agencies, social protection agencies from 7 countries. We followed with great interest the discussion, and we would like also to thank the Jobs Knowledge Platform for having facilitated this virtual session. Again, this is to say that technology is facilitating knowledge, that distance doesn't matter anymore, and we hope that these type of events are really the spirit of what a community of practice should be. We can learn from each other no matter where we are, and especially for employment, in the area of employment, I think it's very important, as we did today, that we bring the private sector together. Here we have stakeholders from the government, but we need to also do partnerships with the private sector to know what they want, to know what they need. And I do believe that successful interactions between government programs and private sector providers for employment could be very successful models for testing and for scaling up in the Middle East and North Africa. Without further ado, I will give this session a closing. And again, thank you very much to all of you for the excellent remarks, and also for the virtual audience for the questions all over the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.